Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chai With Us podcast. This is episode number 44. I am Erika, the personal developer.
Hello, and I'm Ivana from Uncle Isabel.
Yay. And today we're going to talk about children of third culture. If you are
That's right.
wondering what that means, Ivan is going to tell us in a second.
I will. So, third culture kids was a term that was coined by Ruth Hill Usim in 1950. And basically, what she says is that it's an individual who, having spent a significant part of the developmental years in a culture other than the parent's culture, develops a sense of relationship to all of the cultures while not having a full ownership in any. So basically, let's break that down because it's a very long definition. Essentially, what it is it's a child who has parents that are of a different culture, and they
Mm-hmm.
grow up in a country that is not their parents' country. So
Yeah.
you have the parents' culture, you have the host country's culture, and then the child develops the third culture, a mix of both of those cultures. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can be more than one culture or two cultures. Sometimes if you move around a lot, and specifically says in the developmental years, so that means in your childhood. And
Yeah.
most of these kids move before the age of 9. And so, during that time when you're developing your sense of identity, you're being raised in a country that's very different than your parents. And so then you have to figure out, well, what is my culture? And and I love this topic because both you and I, this is who we are. We are children of a third culture, maybe even a fourth culture. And I love
Yes.
that we get to talk about that this morning. So why don't we
Yes.
start by telling people like our background story? Like where were you born and how did you move about?
Yes. You know, you were reading the definition and I was just it's me,
Mhm.
because I come from a different culture. I go to a different country where the culture is different. And
Mhm.
then it's like I'm not even this or that. I'm
Exactly.
me. And
Mhm.
so before I go to the beginning of the story, let me just tell you that I struggled a lot to find like my identity until now, where I just say just F my identity. Like I don't want to be, I was born in Angola,
Okay.
which is a country in Central Africa. And then my mom moved to Portugal and my father
And
moved to
how
Paris.
old were you when you moved?
I was around 7 years old.
Okay. Mhm.
Yeah. So we moved to Portugal and then my father moved to France, Paris. So I was
Okay.
automatically separated from my father.
Mhm.
Not that he was around or anything like that, but physically, like
Mhm.
we were really apart. So yeah, and it was like obviously when you are born in Africa and then you go to Portugal, Europe,
Mhm.
there are some differences,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
It's like for me, I, I would have to sit down and speak for 10 hours, but just to give you a little bit of a vibe of what's going on, what was going on at the time. Like I was a little black girl, 7 years old. I was very intelligent apparently because they were so surprised that I was intelligent and that because usually when people would come from other countries, they would expect that your
Mhm.
education is a little bit inferior
Yes.
than the education that at the time. I am 34
Exactly.
now, okay, so that
Mhm.
was a long time ago.
So this
Right
was in the
now,
1990s.
yeah, around
Mhm.
around that time. So right now things are a little bit different, but at the time it was like, oh my god, she has got the same level as we have, and at the time it was like everybody was like, oh my god, yes. And now I think like it was not oh my effing god, it was just like legit. I was a normal girl and the school
Mhm.
year was like I was
Mhm.
not that special. Like they were surprised because I was obviously black coming from Africa. Like how is it possible? So yeah, there were no black people around me, and I was the only black girl pretty much everywhere.
Mhm.
And right now you go to Portugal, especially Lisbon, and it's like you are in a very multicultural
Yes.
environment and you see people of all colors. That was not my reality at all. I did not see black people around me, and I grew up in a household where like African culture was not accepted.
Okay.
This is a little bit crazy, but now that I'm an adult, I do understand, like, and I
Mhm.
don't understand at the same time,
Mhm.
but I do understand where they were coming from, like trying to protect us children, and helping us like blend in,
Okay.
you know.
Yes.
So I wasn't listening to any African music. I was
Mhm.
not in contact with any African people. So it
Mhm.
was just like, okay, I am different. And then there are those people. It was just like very confusing. We can elaborate on
Mhm.
that because I don't want to be like, doing like a monologue over here. And we can elaborate on that because I'm sure you
Yeah.
had some experiences that are
Mhm.
similar. But it was just like very confusing. Everything was confusing.
Yes.
Realizing that I was black because,
Mhm.
like, I mean, I didn't wake up as a kid. I was like, oh wow, I'm black. No, but realizing like, oh, I'm black, so that's
Uh-huh.
something. It's different. Okay, it's
Yes.
not that good to be black because I get different treatment. I
Mhm.
was just like weird years, dude.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel you basically said so much of the same things that I felt as well. Like I was 6 when I grew up in what was former Yugoslavia, and in 92 they had a civil war. So we had to leave and we moved to Germany. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was very difficult because I looked like the people. They were all white and I was white. And so I kind of fit in, but I didn't speak the language. And I felt like I was a fish out of water because in school I
Okay.
didn't understand anything. I was
Mhm.
crying all the time. The school's officials thought that my mom was like abusing me at home, and that's why I was crying. And the same thing, like what you said about your dad, my dad had stayed behind in the country. And so I grew up for maybe about 2 or 3 years without him. So there's all these formative years of like 6 years old and 7 and 8 without a father figure in the house. And that was very difficult. And then when he came back, it was kind of like trying to figure out what is his role in our family because he was
Mhm.
gone. And so my mom was
Mhm.
both the mom and the dad for some time. So it was very difficult, like the first time around. And then it happened again in 98 when I moved to the US. But this time around, I was 12. It was a little bit easier because I knew what to expect.
Mhm.
But you're so completely right because when we moved to the US, they thought that even though I was coming from Germany, they thought that like I wasn't maybe as smart enough. And I was. Like they let me skip a whole grade because of all the things that I knew. And so, but I don't know where this comes from. I think nowadays it's not like that anymore, but
Yeah.
the country just assumes that you're not on the same educational level just because you grew up in a different country.
Yeah, but like geography is still the same. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like if we're not
Yes,
talking about like the national history of the country,
right.
you know,
Math,
math is the
science,
same
it's a
everywhere,
lot
you
of the
know?
same things. Yeah. So
Exactly.
I
So
had
it's interesting.
a very difficult time. The second time around was much easier, but the why I struggle with this is like it's this thing that I read and says having roots like nowhere and
Yes.
everywhere, like
Hmm.
because you're like, where is home? You know what I mean? Like, and I always hated that question when somebody asks you where are you from, because that always is like a 5 minute answer.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Sometimes, like just depending on the person, I would be like Portugal and just leave, because I don't want to
Exactly,
explain the whole thing. Like it's too
exactly.
long. I born in Angola and then went to Portugal and then come here to Spain and I've been living here for 6 years. And why did it? Like it's just like you are so right. But I love these what you just shared about having roots
Yes.
because I struggled with this a little bit
Mhm.
and I was like, where are my roots? Like, where are my roots? Where are my roots? Because
Mhm.
since the way I grew up, I told you we didn't have a lot of African culture. You know,
Right.
we
Mhm.
ate African food
Mhm.
sometimes. As like I don't know, let's do something like African today. But besides that, mm, there was not much,
Mhm.
nothing about history. I didn't
Mhm.
have a lot of contact with my other cousins and stuff like that. We were just like
Mhm.
point blank isolated. So I was very isolated from the African culture, you know. And this
Mhm.
was for me, like on my most recent years, I was even embarrassed to assume that. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I was
Mhm.
born there and I know nothing. Like,
Exactly.
you know what is nothing? It's
Yes.
just like,
Yes.
oh my God,
I know exactly what you mean.
thank you. And I was like, this is so freaking embarrassing.
Yes.
And I do understand where they were coming from and everything, but I
Mhm.
think it's such a shame,
Mhm.
that I've
Mhm.
lost this rich culture that I'm, embracing right now.
Mhm.
Where was I going with that? Okay, so I had no contact with the African culture apart
Yes.
from the African in my mom and in my stepfather, which was like,
Mhm.
there are probably some influences in their personalities. That was it.
Okay.
Okay, nothing
Mhm.
else. Um, and then I am here, and what am I going to do? So I'm going to absorb the Portuguese culture. Like, what
Exactly.
else? I'm
Yes.
a kid, I'm a sponge. What else am I
Mhm.
going to do? I'm going to
Mhm.
observe this culture. And this is actually a social phenomenon. That's what happens to people like us. We want to
Yes.
fit and I didn't have any other references. So I was like, let me
Mhm.
hold on to this. But the
Mhm.
thing is, my friends, school, teachers would look at me, and I don't look like someone who fits in that culture, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then when I go, when I'm like 15 and 16, and I go to different neighbors and I start to connect with African people, they're like, your accent is not even African.
Exactly.
You
Yes.
don't speak like an African
So
person.
you look like them, but you don't sound like them, and and they can tell that there's
Exactly.
something off about you. It's like you're like that puppy that doesn't belong.
Exactly. I had a boyfriend that told me once that he thought I was I was faking my accent to look better. Like, like I wanted to like fake being white. No, it's my freaking accent. I don't have an African accent. That's how I speak. And I also have to tell you that my grandfather was Portuguese.
Okay.
My mom is mixed. So it's
Mhm.
not like we were 100% African. That's it.
Right.
We were
Mhm.
already mixed.
Mhm.
So this and the lack of exposure to African culture and stuff, and then absorbing the culture, I'm like, I go to the Portuguese people and they're like,
Exactly. Yes.
and I go to the African people and they're like, I'm like, what the hell? I
It's so true. I can relate
I
completely.
don't fit anywhere. Like it
Yes.
was so freaking weird and a
Uh-huh.
struggle. Seriously, until I got to my 30s.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
when I was like, okay, I'm gonna be this. This is me. Okay? It's mixed, it's messy. This is me. And forget about the roots because I ain't got
Mhm.
any. Or I got
Mhm.
many. Just depends on the way
I
you see
feel
it.
the same way. It's like when I go back to my parents' culture and actually the country that I was born in, Bosnia, it's like I don't belong. Like something, I just don't feel connected to the people there, and it's because
Mhm.
I didn't grow up there, and we grew up so differently, and we have different beliefs about so many things that I just don't
Yes.
fit in. And they use the Serbs use a different alphabet, the Cyrillic alphabet. So if I'm in a grocery store, I cannot read what it says. So like I can't even simply go and buy like a bag of groceries because I can't use the machine. And sometimes I've had to ask people for help, and they look at me and they're like, "What? Why don't you know how to read this?" Like because I
Yes.
look like them, I sound a little bit like them, but something is off, and they know it. They just can't point the finger at it.
Yes.
So, and I love what you said because I also came across this thing. It says a sense of belonging is in the relationships to others of similar experience. So our
Mhm.
belonging comes from like me and you about sharing our experience because we had the same experience. Even though we grew up like worlds apart,
Yeah.
we had almost exactly the identical experience.
Yeah. And it's crazy. And the more I talk about this, like the more things I realize because
Mhm.
what I just told you about the school and they're thinking that
Yes.
I was not intelligent. I was like, I didn't know that this was happening, to
Exactly.
you at that time. This was just like a general thing. And it's crazy. Like, and that's why it's so good to share these experiences.
Mhm.
And right now, there are a lot of children of third culture. Like
Absolutely. Yes.
It's
Because more
crazy.
people are moving about and it's becoming a globalization.
Yes, you have people from Europe living in Asia, people from Asia
Hmm.
living in Europe, people from Europe going to the United States. Like this
Yes.
is like a global world. And
Hmm.
now we have more people to talk about it. You can just type it on
Exactly.
YouTube, whatever you want to type,
Yes.
and you will find people you can relate to. Uh, I didn't have a lot of people. Well,
Yes.
let me think about it. I really didn't have people like me, like while I was growing up until I got like to my
Hmm.
20s, maybe. No, when I went to, yeah, until I was in my 20s, I've met a woman who's now like one of my best friends, Tanya,
Hmm.
and she has a very similar experience to mine. But
Hmm.
besides that, everyone just, seemed to fit in wherever, they
Yes.
were navigating. And
And
I do
something,
think I had a very rich experience, even though it was
yes.
very difficult. But I was
Hmm.
kind of jealous because they just were, they were just,
Yes, they had that best friend since first grade, and that
yes.
always bothered me. It's like, why don't I have that best friend that like, and now right now I've reconnected with my best friend in Germany in first grade. But before, I was like, why can't I live somewhere where I've known all the people and I was always the new kid in the school? Like, why do I always have to be the new kid?
Yeah, and that's so difficult for the kids. Listen, have you moved around a lot, or did you just, settle grounds in Germany and you were in this house for years and then
So, and
what
when we
happened?
first moved to Germany, we stayed in Germany and stayed in one place. But then when I moved to the US, I moved around a lot in the US. I
Okay.
lived in Alabama, then I moved to Mississippi and Michigan, and then ended up in Chicago. And so for me, I feel like I have this thing where like every 6 years I need to move because that's all I know. Like I know that it's
Mm,
6 years,
mhm.
it's time for a change. And so that has become my norm. It's like every 6 years I'm like, okay, it's time to leave. And when
Yeah.
you're always leaving, sometimes it's hard, difficult to form like deep relationships with people because
Yeah.
you're always leaving. You're not staying.
Yeah. And are you happy with that process, like every 6 years moving?
Well, I was, but now that I'm getting older, it's becoming much more difficult to make friends. I feel like when you're not in school anymore, it's much more difficult to make friends. And so
Yeah.
now I'm not. Now I want to be settled. But before, I was very much this like rootless person. I didn't know where my roots were. Couldn't really. Yes, I was born in Boston, but I didn't really feel like an attraction to that country or
Hmm.
anything. And
Hmm.
then I can't really claim Germany as my home because I'm not German. It was just a place where I briefly lived.
Yeah.
And so I say to people that like I'm a Bosnian American who grew up in the U.S. because that's where I spent a lot of my years.
Yeah.
Um, but and something you mentioned too is that like your parents didn't really have any African culture at home because they wanted you to fit in. Same with me. Like when we lived in Germany, I did not know anything about Bosnia. Like we did not do any Bosnian. We did everything that was culturally appropriate in Germany.
Yes.
Uh, but and so I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that was the right decision on your parents' part, or do you think that it
Uh,
wasn't?